Okay. So yes, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the session. The subject for this month's webinar is around methane, methane emissions, detection, quantification, and mitigation. We'll talk about that as part of the intro a little more in a moment. Firstly, I want to just run through the housekeeping as usual. We're going to keep audience mics and cameras turned off. We do want your contributions for Q&A at the end, so please use the Zoom chat function to pose your questions as Matt and Marwa are doing their presentations. And just a brief run through of what we're going to be doing. A little introduction from me. Matt's going to then present, hand over to Marwa, and we'll have about 20 minutes or so on Q&A at the end. And if we've got some time for some closing remarks, then we'll do that. So yes, thanks. Massive thanks really to our two speakers, Matt Harrison from SLR and Marwa Hassan from Schlumberger. Thanks also to our sponsor ERCE. I think for my mind this is such an important topic because methane as a greenhouse gas, it's extremely potent. Yeah, over an 80-year period, it's 20 times more potent than CO2. So as an industry, oil and gas is responsible for some significant methane emissions. So really, if we want to be impactful in helping tackle climate change and achieving net zero objectives, focusing on methane is something which can have significant impact, be it through sort of educating ourselves, influencing our colleagues, or taking sort of direct practical action with the projects which you're working on. So that's why it's important. This session hopefully will cover that education part. We've got two great speakers. So Matt Harrison, he's got a background in refinery and chemical operations, originally with Exxon. He's now with SLR, and he's been involved in methane in various ways for decades. So a real long-standing expertise. And with SLR, he covers everything, it seems, from greenhouse gas emission inventories and protocols through to field research and getting onto regulatory compliance and methods of reduction. So his talk's going to be looking at the whole sort of subject of methane emissions inventories and what efforts we've got going on in terms of reducing those. Marwa Hassan, she's got a background in nuclear engineering. So I think she's our first nuclear engineer to participate in one of these. So very happy to welcome her. She's now with Schlumberger and has a strong focus on all things digital, it would seem. So she's been involved in digital oil fields, and now she's currently the digital product manager for Schlumberger's emissions business. So I think that's all I want to say. I'll leave you in the far more capable hands of Matt and Marwa. And as I say, as the session goes on, please do submit your questions via the chat function. So over to you, Matt. I think you're...
All right, very good. Just as a point of order check, can you see my first slide?
Yes, I can.
All right, very good. So thank you for that kind introduction, Barney. Again, Matt Harrison, I'm with SLR. As you can tell by my accent, I'm located in the USA. However, SLR, our headquarters are in the UK. So we have some global coverage. What I'm going to be talking about today is, of course, methane emissions detection, quantification, and mitigation. I'll be giving that a broad brush. I do want to say, basically, I will be commenting on the natural gas supply chain, where methane measurement, reduction, mitigation applied to that. Of course, in the very upstream end, that covers oil and gas production. However, there are many other sources, as you know, of methane, from coal mines to agricultural operations to manure management and agricultural to landfill, etc. However, we are going to be talking about the fossil fuel side, and particularly the natural gas supply chain side, from production to consumption. And that's where most of these measurement and mitigation issues that I will be talking about come in. So basically two topics: methane measurement I'll cover separately, and then I will jump to reduction mitigation. And within each of those, I'll talk about some trends, things to watch, and hopefully also give you a couple of resources to look for within that. So let me go on to the next slide. I want to talk about in the world of methane emissions inventory, simply because I'd say I was a gray hair, but most of it's gone now. I've been in it a good bit, and really up until now, if you said how were methane emissions inventories nationally or for a particular company going, it was a very slow evolution. And what I mean by that is that the basis for calculating companies' emissions inventories were based upon measurements, but maybe measurements done in large regional or national studies that were done years ago, in some cases decades ago. And then those emission factors and activity factors were used to calculate the company's inventory, but there weren't necessarily specific company measurements used in creating those inventories, particularly where those inventories were used for regulatory reporting purposes, because those were very structured and restricted. So on those inventories, the growth in that had been, is there an additional national study or regional study that gives us some new insight to be able to improve some of the emission factors used in those kind of bottom-up paper inventories that were being generated. And that was a slow process, although there definitely was growth in that area, and we participated in many of those over the years. Up until now, that was slow. We'll talk about some of the things that are making that a faster change right now. And some of those faster changes are, of course, methane became a much more key focus recently. And that has led to a number of additional regional studies, especially in North America, in the past 10 years. One of the interesting things is, as you can see on the second bullet, is in the past 10 years, quite a number of these studies end up saying, well, here's what we measure as a total for this region, just for the natural gas supply chain. And when we total up what's reported, we come up with more being measured than reported. And at first, this just turned into kind of a rock throwing episode, if you will, between the scientists doing top-down measurements and the engineers and scientists doing bottom-up. But now I think they're all on the same team. And we realize that we have this discrepancy of higher measurements and reporting, and that leads to the need to reconcile those. And also is pointing out that some of those bottom-up inventories need to be validated by actual macro level measurements. Also, up until now, it's really been voluntary efforts in terms of measurements, because maybe you have to follow an emission factor approach to calculate your inventory. If you did measurements, that wasn't because the reporting program was requiring it. And so the voluntary efforts were tests in that area, and they were implemented without really specific globally accepted standards. We are seeing regulatory drivers continuing to increase. Of course, me being in the USA, I have some USA examples down below having to do with our Securities and Exchange Commission, the most recently passed in the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, which will make the US EPA now add measurement to the reporting requirements within the next 2 years. So with that, let me go on to the next slide. That's probably the longest slide I'll spend time on. Another thing under methane emissions inventories that I want to talk about is what is changing. So I hinted in the last slide, a lot of things are changing, and many new rate measurement techniques are evolving. It's actually pretty exciting, really, if you look at where we've been for years in terms of what options you would have for saying an approach. People were thinking about methane emissions measurements only in terms of, for the most part, in terms of kind of leak detection and repair protocols, where someone would go through a whole facility and scan each connector and such. But now there's quite a long list of widely used technologies to look at kind of a macro scale, a site scale, or larger regional scale measurement technologies. And some of those I've listed here. So there's still local detection and quantification with handheld devices, replacing things like your simple flame ionization detector that would have been used in leak detection and repair in refineries and chemical plants and things like that, are the optical gas imaging cameras. Now, these are not just go down to your local outfitter and buy a camera that's infrared. These are ones tuned specifically for methane, cooled also so that they can, and with special optics, so that they can get methane down to a pretty reasonably low level. And those are called generally optical gas imaging cameras. Those are used for scanning. Also, there's some what's called Q, the Q being quantification, optical gas imaging cameras for QOGI for post-processing, and the post-processing images to produce emissions estimates. There's been high volume samplers that give you a direct rate for a found source for 25 years, but there's now some generation 2 samplers. And then when we switch away from handheld, you're looking at aerial detection and quantification. This could be drone or aircraft. And there's a lot of plume identification technologies, some of them with LiDAR, light detection and ranging, or your more traditional infrared spectroscopy. And those can overfly a lot of sites with a plume identification. And finally, you can also, with aircraft and drones, do a downwind mass balance curtain, for example. Some of the things you can do with aircraft overflights, you can do also with satellites, but you're further away. And in general, the distance reduces your ability to find a leak of a smaller size. That decreases with distance. But the good news is they have wider swaths. But the disadvantage of the aerial approaches is, of course, they're usually a set point in time, so they're not continuous. And so the last bullet mentions some continuous monitoring systems. These are quite a variety of systems, to be honest. Most common ones being tested and deployed are probably what you might typically have called in other industries fence line detectors or ambient detection. Within the site, a fixed location concentration sensor, but there are many other systems that do imaging and other things that could look at a site continuously as well. These are beginning to be used in the industry. So with that having been said, let me just say a big, probably one that I want to concentrate on, saying, hey, well, that's all interesting, and maybe that leads to just a faster evolution of the emission factor, activity factor approach. I would say there is a big change coming, and what that means is each company is now going to be looking at needing to do their own verification measurement in the future, so that your paper inventories, no matter how diligently done, at some point will no longer be solely sufficient. There's several new initiatives that guide reconciliations between paper inventories and larger scale measurements. And so some of the emerging guidelines and protocols you can see in blue there, of course, OGMP 2.0 with the United Nations endorsement. Gas Technology Institute's Project Veritas, which is in demonstration phase right now, and publicly released protocols are due out early Q1 2023. And QMRV, which is an abbreviation for quantification, measurement, record keeping, or reporting and verification, keeping the measurement and the verification part. And key being Q is quantification, not concentration in air, but quantification of rate of emission. A QMRV program in Cheniere has a program they're developing that they're going to, they're applying to their own systems, but they are also rolling out such that it could be applied to any such systems. And there's some similarities and significant differences between these three programs. But in all of them, reconciliation will be a large issue. And a large issue will be, how do you address handling discontinuous emissions? Emissions that start and stop. If you look at leak detection and repair, for the most part, they assume if one starts, it continues until you find it and fix it. But there's many other kinds of emissions as well, other than leaks from sealed surfaces. So what's the consequence of that? Voluntary reduction commitments may have been made if you say these measurements might prove that you're a little bit higher than you think in a paper inventory, and a company's already made a voluntary commitment to reach net zero or reach a certain methane intensity level. Well, they may have a larger lift to accomplish that now if they've changed their starting point, and that can be significant. Okay, I want to continue by saying remaining issues to resolve, and there's a number in these methane emissions inventories. There's still some inadequately characterized sources, and I've given a couple of examples. I've already mentioned the underestimation shown, the discontinuous emissions, and what are called super emitters, which is just really a way of saying these are not normally distributed, but usually a skewed distribution, as in many things in life. And so how do you find what used to be called, let's say, the 80-20 rule, the 20% of sources that cause 80% of the emissions? How do you find those 20% quickly? Because that's going to be your most efficient approach. And establishing these guidelines that will come out of those three programs I just mentioned as an example. With that, because measurements can be done by a number of systems, handling actual measurement uncertainties and calculating that will be an issue. And of course, ultimately, all these new measurements, how do they get incorporated into a reporting program? So I'm going to jump now to the second topic, methane reduction efforts. Up until now, it's been regulatory drivers, cap and trade, carbon tax, that you all in Europe know that much better than in the US, where it's basically been a state level issue. There is no federal US cap and trade carbon tax, but there are regulatory required controls. And in fact, we're going to see more of those in the US along the natural gas supply chain. And other than that, it's been voluntary commitments made by each company. So with that in mind, many things have, some of these have been around for a while, and some of these are relatively new, meaning some of the past 5 years, some of the past 10 years, programs and groups that are doing either differentiated gas or standards for measurement or reduction or reporting commitment standards. And this is not even all of them. This is just a, one list of interesting ones. So a company will have an issue sorting through all of these, if you will, in deciding what they do going forward. So you'll see in later slides, I think there will be some consolidation. So in the world of methane reduction efforts, what's coming? I think we're going to see more methane intensity control targets. In other words, a company not only committing to net zero, but some companies are already doing this, saying we will achieve the following methane intensity, which is just methane divided by your throughput. So it's a way to make sure that target stays the same, whether you're growing as a company and increasing your assets or shrinking. to make sure that a standard is comparable across that. We're going to see additional control source regulations, especially in the US. There's going to continue to be a demand for transparency as this data is gathered, and the verification measurement is coming. So I've repeated the point there that was made previously. And so conclusions, what's left to resolve in the future? Commitments on reductions are going to drive additional projects, both in measurement and reduction. And so, as I said, verification measurements are required. We're going to see companies spending capital and committing to programs that require measurements where you didn't have to do that before. It's probably obvious, but I should say achieving net zero for a company, for a system handling natural gas will always require some offsets to cross that finish line, because you can never reach absolute zero emissions. So the trick is, how do you get there with having to buy the minimum offsets? How do you make progress in the meantime? Harmonizing these various initiatives and standard use of emission measurement technologies that have been developing is a challenge, especially globally, because to be honest, in the US, this has been focused. And so some of these techniques, companies offering services, technologies have been deployed in Europe or the US first, or in Canada, I'm including North America. But how do you get them to a spot in somewhere else in the world is more of a trick. You may not have the same available menu. And then reconciliation and data management. So my last slide, I just want to give a nod to one of the Highwoods Emissions Management has put out a report, and they're out of Canada, comparing all these different systems, some of which you saw on that previous icon page, a logo page, and they have this is their slide shown how these quantification guidelines relate to certifications, differentiated markets, ESG reporting and commitments. This is their approach, not mine, but it is a good way to think about, hey, how do these things relate to each other? And I'm not going to go through it nor expect you to read it all, but merely giving you a teaser to say you may want to go look at that report if you haven't already. That report is this one right here on the far right logo. And so I've provided a link, and we'll share these slides afterwards. There's also a National Academies report in the US talking about how these things are characterized. And there's an update in progress right now that will come out, I think, late 2022. So we're late 2022 already, at the end of the year, or by the end of the year, very beginning of next year, I think, that will update approaches, measurement techniques, etc. And that gives a good link. And you can also look within some of the other programs, such as the Methane Guiding Principles, OGP 2.0, and of course, there's a number of methane-focused conferences. So with that, let me stop and hand it over to Marwa, who's going to talk about some of the more interesting data management digital issues with this. And we'll save the Q&A for the end. And I'm going to stop sharing, Marwa, so you can go.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, as well from me. Yeah, and as Matt mentioned there, the aim is that after the session, we'll load the presentations up onto the SPE London website, along with a copy of the recording of this. So yeah, thanks, Matt. I've already got questions for you, Matt.
Okay.
Audience, please submit your questions via the chat box. So thank you. And I think I'm really looking forward to what you got to say, Marwa, because sort of digital is going to play a role. You're going to tell us what role.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Matt and Barney. And really, I'm very glad to come in the presentation after Matt, because it's very much linked to really what Matt has been presenting and has been talking about. There are many initiatives. There are many standards. There are many policies. Some of them have been there for a long time. Some of them are very new, like the OGMP, for example, the MGP initiatives, right? All of them are suggesting new standards, suggesting how to build an inventory, the new measurements that you need to adopt, right? And I'm here to talk about a part of this, which is digital. Digital have already been in the oil and gas industry for like 15 or 20 years, and it have proven really tremendous value when it comes to things like transforming data into insights, reducing time and effort handling data, providing visibility on performance, and simplifying the standards and the processes of any of emissions inventory, for example, that we're talking about, giving directions and recommendations. So today's presentation, I'll focus on how digital can improve methane emission management and reduction. So you spoke about a very interesting point, Matt, which is we are very lucky to have varying technologies, measurement technologies going in trials and experimentational in many assets and many fields. However, that also put a huge challenge on operations on how do they choose accurate measurement technology that actually fit their operation. What should be the frequency of the measurements? How do they understand uncertainties around each measurement? How do they select the frequency of the surveys? Should they adopt a fixed monitor, for example, a continuous monitoring? So should they adopt a mobile monitor? What exactly is the suitable solution for them? And then the second point is that methane emission is not a one domain issue. It runs across the full value chain of oil and gas. And it have its implications on supporting businesses, just as similar to finance, for example, and supply chain, right? So visibility of the data, auditability, accuracy of the data is very important to deliver measurable results across the whole organization. The third one is collaboration is really vital when looking for corporate perspective and evaluating different scenarios and abatement. Which one brings more value? Is it technically viable, for example, to be done? Is the cost within the operational, the OPEX cost? Is there a risk in adopting this abatement strategy to the HSE limits? And then building a representative, so that one of the points is building a representative inventory away from the pen and paper, an inventory on a company level that is not only it's not only a tedious effort when we try to do it digitally, but it's also establishing the methodology to track emissions on source by source basis, not on equipment's level or on a asset level, but on a source by source basis, so that you're able to take decision and to avoid events that that are unnecessary. The last point is that those challenges that we're talking about, actually, they are not standard. They vary a lot between assets and between operation. So what we can adopt for offshore platform, for example, might have to change tremendously when you're adopting it for an onshore asset. Having said so, digital, and I'm sorry, the figures are actually not matching, the pictures are not matching what I'm talking about right now, so apology for that. But to go to the point, the digital have proved to reduce lots of those challenges and contributing to minimizing effort and cost around managing emissions. Mainly, sorry, let me go. For example, cost-effective technology evaluation. There are currently emerging programs. Stanford have a very good tool that actually fits US operation that can give you or enable you to choose a suitable measurement technology based on your asset parameters, taking into consideration cost of inspection and repair, cost of technology, and survey frequency requirements. The ability to view emission sources contribution across the oil and gas value chain enables you to prioritize areas which requires immediate attention, or even to understand which one will bring you the higher return of investment, and to focus your efforts. Converting standards that Matt has been talking about into workflows, knowing what's the required input, what are the consequences, what are the uncertainty, what are the scenarios that will reduce investing in unnecessary actions. Another point is with the ability to continuously tracking events, performance reduction, KPIs, you're able to stay on the track of your objectives. So you're able to monitor your progress and continuous improvement. So the question might not be how digital can improve managing methane emission, but more of how do I utilize digital to reduce emission? So this is where we're going to spend the rest of the presentation. Let's discuss some of the points that you can tackle on your own very quickly using your existing digital tools within your current organization. Okay. So the first idea that we need to focus on is that it's not about purchasing a new digital tool. It's not about purchasing software or replacement of your existing digital canvas, but the primary objective is to understand which existing data and existing tools within your organization can help you and support your reduction journey. Your organization probably have emissions data stored in different databases. You probably have independent measurements, for example, in 2 or 3 dashboards. You probably have an emission accounting tool or emission accounting Excel sheet that quantify emissions using estimation methodology. You might have a process simulation models within your facility, for example, where people are using it to simulate your facility, that probably can give you some information in your on your emissions. And you probably have some metering data information within your SCADA, for example, right? Or your hydrocarbon accounting tool. All those informations, OGI data, for example, in your maintenance system, all this information can bring tremendous value to you if organized. So if you spend some time mapping existing data with existing tools, identifying essential gaps that needs to be filled, and structure a way that enables those data to communicate and integrate within a solid inventory. Try to categorize this data so that it can be associated with your sites, with your sources, and with your emissions categories: fugitives, venting, flaring, combustion, and so on. Once you've done that, there is an important point, or there is an easy way also to look into some points, right? First of all, try not to look into emissions reduction or emissions accounting exercises as a tax accounting exercise. So far, what we've been all guilty doing is that this is an exercise that was done once a year so that we can submit a sustainability report. That's why I sometimes call it similar to tax accounting exercise, right? But there need to be a change in the organization mindset, that this is all about continuous improvement, and it's all about small steps that you can do. If you can understand your asset emissions sources and structure, how much number of leaks events, observations that you're getting from each asset, how much is the rate of your methane emission fugitives, for example, how much is each asset contributing, is each source contributing to the emission within your asset. Once you build your inventory, you're able to understand and categorize the emissions behavior within your asset and sources, then focus on establishing an end goal. What is suitable for you, or how are you going to achieve this reduction? This that will enable you to structure your efforts through following, for example, OGMP. Is it through certifying your gas using MIQ, for example? Is it through screening reduction opportunities? What are the smart goals that can make you achieve reduction? The reason you need to think about the end goal is because starting from linking the inventory into actions within a digital platform requires a correct workflow around the end goal that you have. Emissions digital tools, when you're in your digital journey, make sure that you're not building a silo digital tool, meaning that you need to capitalize on your operational data. As we said, SCADA, production databases, maintenance, any tool that you're using within your day-to-day operation needs to be capitalized on. Deal with the problem as something very similar to how you deal, for example, with equipment reliability, with artificial lift monitoring, right? It all talk to each other. It's not a silo platform, because the more you actually embed within the existing day-to-day tools, the more you will be able to capture value out of it, the more you will be able to have different departments and different organizations different segments from your organization using this and building a strategy. Always aim for improving. Before we move into the improvement, once you capitalize on this, ensure that that this digital platform will give you suitable actions. It's not only about data management. It's not only about viewing the data. It's about the actions that you need to do. For example, I'm looking into the highest emission is coming from my field production. Highest emission is coming from compressors. Is this the area that I need to focus on? 50% of your field have no measurements, of your assets, sorry, have no measurements. Does that mean that I need to adapt for a specific measurement on this part? I'm using satellite, for example. Is this the suitable methodology for me to be able to achieve my reduction? It takes 3.5 days to close your leak detection tickets. Is this an appropriate time for your regulations and for your organization to achieve your reduction? So simply focus on the end goal actions that this digital journey that you're building can achieve to you. Don't only focus on data management. Focus on data accuracy, visibility, audibility, and then transforming it into actions that can help you take decisions. And then talking about data, try to improve data accuracy and making it more suitable for your field. For example, I'm giving an example here. Start building a sampling strategy, right, to replace your emission factors from general emission factors to specific emissions factors related to your field. This can bring huge improvement to the accuracy of the emission data that you're reporting or that you're building the strategy on it. Remember that this is very similar. This will cost you to reduce emission. This will cost you money, right? This will be additional cost to you. So you need to invest properly. You need to actually properly estimate your emissions so that you know the size of return of investment that you're putting on this strategy. And now focusing on one of the biggest challenges that Matt was talking about, it's challenge and opportunity at the same time, that there is huge amount of technology that's already developed and in development to measure specifically fugitives and venting. mainly fugitive because it's unintentional leak and it's intermittent in behavior. So it's difficult to capture without measurements. So you might have, in some companies, for example, we've seen like people having 4 dashboards, independent dashboards, independent databases dealing with the quantification and monitoring of emissions. So in order for you to be able to deal with a multi-measurement problem, you need to try and divide the challenge that you have into small projects. What do you want to tackle first? So if you remember from this this slide, once you specify what are the categories that are contributing to your highest emission, you're able then to build projects based on that. Is it fugitives? Is it combustion? Is it venting? Define the problems, the challenges, and divide it into small projects. Right? You're able to focus your efforts. You're able to know which areas you need to focus on, and you're able to do small investments and capture the return of investment very quickly. Most probably, you will need to utilize at least 2 different measurements technology, especially if you're going to do something like OGMP, for example. So there are many programs that evaluate technologies. So it's very important that you evaluate which technology. So you compare which technology is suitable for you and your asset based on your operational parameter. You define how much is your reduction from those tools and how much is the cost and the frequency of having to use those technology. Is it twice a year? Is it once a year? Is it every month? How much will it cost you? And is the reduction in emission achieved by this technology, is it justifiable or not?
I see you and Gavin asked me to do this, but I think because you PDF to we handle this mistake.
I'm sorry, can we mute? Sorry, guys.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's possible to mute, I would appreciate that. Then aim to have this all data displayed in one view so that you can identify and prioritize your maintenance program. Where do you start? What to fix first? How can you optimize and reduce the cost and effort related to your inspection program once you're able to identify areas of concerns using multiple measurements technology? When you're choosing the technology that will enable you to give you that should enable you to give you approximate as possible as an indication to your emission source. So if your objective is to understand if you have emissions or not, satellite might be enough. But if your objective is related to efforts fixing equipments or leak detection, then try as much as possible to have the technology that can approximately give you the location where you just direct your team to go and spend less time fixing this equipment. You don't want something that will specify high area for you or big area for you, that at the end you will have the team doing the same inspection that they used to do before, right? Or else the measurement technology that you're using would be useless. Another important part is also asking for if the technique is able to minimize number of positive forces. This will enable you to avoid unnecessary field trips. So if you're able to identify if your digital journey or your ability to connect this measurement technology with your SCADA, for example, to identify if this is a leak or vent, if this is fugitive or vent, or from the technology provider, if this is a false positive, this will hugely minimize your field trips to fix something. The last point is that always try and close the loop. which means that don't stop there. Don't stop only by knowing how much is the leak or how much is it fugitive or venting. You need to act, right? And by acting, I mean, you have an objective. For example, if your objective is to optimize your LDAR, then automate this program so that it can open a ticket system, for example, within your maintenance system, and provide you and track your crew ability to fix the leak until closure. So you actually know how much time you're spending. You're able to quantify how much was the total emission through the time between the detection and the fix. If your objective is just to report, for example, then close the loop, automate your digital platform so that it can push the validated data and updated data to your reporting platform, right? So just simply, as much as possible, try to close the loop between different systems. This is yes.
Yeah, is this nearly the last slide?
This is yes. This is my last slide.
Great, thanks.
Perfect. So basically, here we're talking about abatement, right? An abatement is the quickest, fastest route to reduction, right? Doing abatement scenarios. So if the first important part is for you to define really what are you looking for when it comes to abatement. Is it are you looking for fastest route to reduction regardless of cost and efforts? Is it is your abatement strategy cost sensitive? You will be selecting the most cost-effective scenario. Is it based on your total methane reduction that you're able to achieve, or are you simply trying to comply with a specific regulation, or are you looking for a new stream revenue that can provide new products for you and new revenue for you? Whatever is your goal, MAC curves, marginal abatement cost curves, although they are not fully digitalized yet, and I think for a bit of a long time, they will not be digitalized because they are based on expert opinion. So it's difficult to digitalize them at this stage, but as we mature, you're able to digitalize it and do something specifically for your organization so that you can evaluate your scenarios based on your segments or based on your operation or sites, for example. So I'm gonna skip this one for time purposes. But thank you all very much, really, for your time, and I'll leave it up for questions.
That's great. Thanks very much, Marwa.
Thank you.
Let me bring Matt back in, if that's okay, and hopefully myself. Right, that's yeah, no, it's a fantastic set of presentations. We've got some questions already in the chat box, and I see Matt's been posting some answers to that, so I encourage you to go and have a look at those. Keep your questions coming in. I'm actually going to kick off the Q&A with a question from myself, and it's really, you mentioned, Matt, the sort of discrepancy between top-down measurements and bottom-up measurements, and a lot of work has been done to sort of try and resolve those differences. I'm curious as to whether in resolving those differences, you've seen a systematic reason for the differences. Is it, you know, a lack of measurement of the intermittent stuff? Is it, you know, the super emitters not being picked up? Where are the main differences?
You've mentioned a couple of them that are key, and super emitters is kind of a tricky word because it's a characterization of a skewed distribution. Some people don't like that word, but definitely the larger emitters, the intermittent emitters can be an issue. Sometimes it's things we know about but haven't fixed yet. An example I'll give is in the US inventory. Only just this year, and the U.S. greenhouse gas reporting program has been around since 2008, so quite a while now, that only this year they have fixed an issue that was known to exist with methane slip, meaning uncombusted methane in exhaust of lean burn engines, which is one of the drivers for compressors along the gathering and boosting, transmission and storage supply chain. So it was underestimated because they were using a higher efficiency, something maybe from a turbine to represent all things. And of course, you can have much higher methane slip in some of those lean burn engines. And therefore, sites such as some gathering and boosting compressor station sites, et cetera, would have been tremendously underreporting. And yet we knew about it. You did have programs like One Future program, a voluntary reduction tracking program in the US that made their own voluntary addition to that. Some companies were tracking it by themselves, but the oddity was until just this year, so it'll go into effect in next year's reporting, the EPA had not caught up to that. It's just slower on the regulatory side to get it rolled in. So the short answer to your question is yes, it's a mix of all of those. It's not the same in every segment and because the segments are quite often unique. But yes, it's those intermittent sources. How do you find the things, not only the things that you expect to occur with leaks starting and things like that, but the things that you don't know about? How do you assure that they're either not there or that you find them if they are there? And that is part of the problem. So we've seen in some of those sources, for example, I'll even cite a LiDAR study from British Columbia, where they went out and said, hey, one of the sources they found when they overflew all these oil and gas production sites repeatedly over a long period of time was flares that were not lit. And I've forgotten the exact percentage, but let's say it's roughly 10%, maybe a little bit larger than that, the number of flares. And they found that every time they flew. Well, I think if you had talked to an operator, they would have said, and you had said, how much emissions do you have from flares that are unlit? They'd say, well, wait, all my flares have flame assurance or electronic pilots or zero. There's nothing in my report for that. And yet here they found that source. So the short answer is it hasn't been completely reconciled yet, but we're starting to have the tools to be able to do that and find those kinds of things that are out there that people know about but haven't yet pulled into the inventory or just don't know about yet.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Yeah, keep an eye on the chat because Marwa and Matt have been putting in answers to some of the questions. I'll try and cover the questions which they haven't sort of fully answered directly yet. So Adrian Southworth, he's asking which are the main drivers in establishing methane emission reductions? Is it regulation or operators' behavior?
So
maybe Marwa wants to take that one first. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've seen both of them, right? Some areas have very strong regulation, like the US or Canada, for example. Canada and Norway are very strict in the regulations. So a lot of companies are following these regulations. In some other areas, we haven't seen as strict regulations, but operators really have the social and the environmental conscious that they want to improve the environment, they want to be clean, and they want to reduce the hazard that they are producing to the environment.
Okay, Matt, did you want to add anything on that?
Oh, I think she said it perfectly. In fact, she's answered that in there as well, saying, yeah, both regulatory and other social impacts. And in fact, there was a question earlier about how do we get that going globally? It ties into your earlier question, or into that earlier question, I should say. How do you get it going the fastest? The fastest would be a voluntary approach. And the good news is we're seeing a lot of voluntary work by the companies. And you say voluntary, in some cases, you could argue that's been forced by stakeholders or shareholder actions, but let's call all those voluntary and that they're not driven by regulation. And so you're starting to see more of those because the corporation has made a commitment or is being pressured to make a commitment, and that will definitely be faster in many cases than waiting for the regulators to catch up.
Okay.
Now, I'm not encouraging regulation. We're kind of neutral to that, but certainly to answer that previous question about how do you make this go quicker globally, the good news is you have a lot of companies making voluntary commitments, and then now how do they achieve those long-term goals will of course mean some of these things are going to happen.
Okay. I think I would like to add also something on the fastest. How do we make it faster? There is a very essential point which is linking emissions to operation. If you know if your abatement, for example, will produce more gas savings for you, if you know that you can abate with zero cost, for example, or as minimum cost as you can, this can be a big driver to really move faster into this domain or approach. It's not really you don't really need to pay a huge amount of money to be able to reduce emission. That's, I think, a good progress that we're trying to educate people on and trying to show that it's not that expensive to take the route to reduction.
Excellent point, Marwa. Thank you for that. We have hit 2 o'clock, but because we started late because of the Zoom issues, I am going to, if the speakers are okay with it, let us go on till 5 past.
Sure.
Let's wrap up at 5 past. There's a question coming from Mary Guyanfi. Does the SPE have any standardized quantification factors for process methane emissions within the oil and gas industry? Or perhaps any authoritative references to support the first stage quantification by operators?
So that's probably maybe a question for you representing SPE, because I don't know what standards SPE has. I will say there are some available things to use if you're, for example, if you're not in North America, you're not going to use the Canadian or US greenhouse gas reporting program standards. It wouldn't stop you from applying them to your system, but there's no requirement for that. There is also a larger and pre-existing and recently updated American Petroleum Institute, so that's API, compendium of methane emission calculation techniques. I've probably not got the name precisely right, but that document has been around for I don't know, 15 years or so, and has been updated several times and has been used internationally as a basis for creating inventories where there is no local reporting requirement. But I don't know the answer on whether SPE has their own approach.
And I'm afraid I don't know the answer.
I don't know also, I'm sorry.
But it is a good question. Yeah, I think maybe something I have to follow up on.
Yeah, so the compendium, the API compendium would be a good one to look at for Mary if she was looking for approaches there.
And they've just announced an update, I think, a month ago.
Okay.
Right. Recently, yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, we will have to wrap up very briefly. One question from me from Marwa is that you sort of, obviously digital is a big part of this. Where do you see AI coming in? And we're getting all this data. What are we setting up by way of AI alerts so that we take the human component out?
I have to be honest and say it's still very early for AI. That's my honest opinion. I think we need to understand, we will have to rely on expert opinions for at least some years until we structure, or at least until we build a catalog of what's the causes of the events, for example, how did we monitor this event, how do we track it, so that we can train our programs to come with root cause analysis by itself alone. So this will take time. I doubt it if I would be very doubtful if anyone is using AI to do something really in emissions as quick as or as soon as that.
We'll have to invite you back in 3 years' time to talk about the
Hopefully
AI.
before. But
Right, I think we need to wrap up there. So thank you very much to.
But maybe before just I want to add a little bit. Before we talk about AI, what we're doing right now and what other companies are doing is that simply they are just structuring the problem, right? Okay, so I've seen this event, I link it to SCADA event, I can rank it as venting, for example. I'm seeing this behavior. So to map this manually first and then convert it into something AI. Sorry, I had to add this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I mean, in this, well, Matt, Marwa, thank you to our sponsors, ERCE.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And to our audience, thank you. And we look forward to seeing you next time, where I believe our subject is going to be hydrogen. So that look out for information, further information on that.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.